Your daughter can't breathe? That's not my problem. Take her somewhere else.
The waiting room was too quiet, and that silence was dangerous. It was the kind of silence that hummed under the fluorescent lights, broken only by the faint whir of a vending machine and the soft, ragged breathing of a child clinging to life. Her name was Jordan, 5 years old, brown skin pale with fever, chest heaving as though every breath cost more than she could afford. Her mother, Alicia Carter, held her close, rocking gently in the cheap plastic chair, whispering prayers under her breath. But what no one in that sterile clinic knew, not the nurse at the desk, nor the doctor who would soon walk in with arrogance stitched across his face, was that this wasn't just a mother begging for mercy. This was a federal judge, one who had faced down hardened criminals and corruption in America's highest courts. But here, in this small-town clinic, none of her power mattered. Here, she was just another black woman with a sick child, and tonight, that would be enough for a doctor to summon the police instead of help. The double doors hissed open, and he entered. Dr. Richard Halloway, mid-50s, crisp white coat, hair combed back with precision, eyes carrying the smug weight of unchecked authority. He didn't walk. He prowled, each step echoing entitlement against the linoleum floor. His gaze swept over the waiting room with disdain, but when his eyes landed on Alicia and her daughter, the contempt sharpened like a blade. "Excuse me," he barked, his voice laced with irritation. "This is a private clinic." "Emergency services are across town. People without proper insurance should not be here." The words landed like a slap, but Alicia stood, her back straight, her arms tightening protectively around Jordan. "My daughter can't breathe." "She needs help now," she said, her voice steady despite the quake in her chest. But the doctor only smirked, pulling a clipboard to his chest as though shielding himself from contamination. "Ma'am," he sneered, drawing out the word like poison, "this clinic isn't a charity. And I won't be intimidated by theatrics." He turned his head toward the receptionist. "Call security." "No. Call the police." Gasps rippled across the waiting room. A mother of two in the corner pulled her children closer. A young man with a sprained ankle lowered his eyes as though witnessing a scene too dangerous to intervene in. Alicia's heart thundered, but she held her ground, her daughter's weight heavy and fragile in her arms. The receptionist stammered, "Doctor, the girl, she looks really sick." But Halloway silenced her with a glare. "Do as I say." The call was made. Minutes later, the door slammed open again, this time with the stomp of boots. 2 officers entered, hands already hovering near their holsters. One of them, tall and broad with a jaw set like stone, stepped forward. His voice was sharp, rehearsed, dripping with suspicion. "You. Stand up. Step away from the child." His hand hovered closer to his weapon, his eyes scanning Alicia like she was a suspect in a crime yet to be named. The air thickened. Every eye in the waiting room darted between the mother, the child gasping for air, the doctor smirking in the background, and the cops closing in. Alicia didn't flinch. She lowered Jordan gently onto the chair, brushed her daughter's damp forehead, then rose to her full height. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut sharper than any siren. "Officer, my name is Judge Alicia Carter, and I strongly suggest you think very carefully about your next move." Silence. A long, suffocating silence that seemed to stop the hum of the lights, the ticking of the clock, even the ragged breaths of the child. The cop blinked. The doctor's smirk faltered. And in that suspended moment, the entire room realized the ground beneath their feet was shifting. But this was only the beginning. Because before the night was over, lines of power would be redrawn. The arrogance of a racist doctor and the blind obedience of officers would be held up against the resilience of a mother who just happened to hold the gavel of justice in her hand. And when the truth finally shattered the room, It wouldn't just save a child's life. It would expose how deeply cruelty hides behind titles, coats, and badges. And that was when the storm truly began. The officer's hand froze near his holster, his jaw tightening as if he had just bitten into something sour. Judge Alicia Carter's voice hadn't risen, but the weight of her words landed with the kind of authority that demanded attention. In the dim fluorescent glow, her presence seemed to stretch taller, stronger, more immovable than the badge stitched across his chest. The second officer, younger, uncertain, shifted on his feet and glanced toward the doctor for direction. Dr. Holloway straightened, clearing his throat with the smugness of a man who still believed the room belonged to him. "Judge or not," he snapped, "this is a medical facility, and I have the right to refuse service. She brought her child here without the proper documentation or insurance. She's trespassing." His words rang with venom, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He hadn't expected pushback. Alicia turned, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted Jordan again, pressing her fevered cheek against her shoulder. She could feel her daughter's shallow breaths stuttering like a failing engine, each gasp weaker than the last. The mother in her wanted to scream, to demand, to beg, but the judge in her knew that dignity was her sharpest weapon. "Officer," she said, her voice steady, "look at my daughter. Does she look like a threat? Does she look like a trespasser? She is a child in medical crisis. If you stand here and allow this man to deny her care, then you are complicit in whatever happens next." The young officer swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He looked down at Jordan, and for a fleeting moment, humanity cracked through his training. But before he could speak, Dr. Holloway's voice cut sharp again. "Enough. This woman is playing games. I have patients with real emergencies. If her child can't breathe, then she should have gone to county. Now get her out before I call hospital security." The arrogance was suffocating. The waiting room was packed now, every eye fixed on the scene, every heart beating louder with the injustice pressing down. A grandmother whispered a prayer under her breath. A teenage boy clenched his fists, his sprained ankle forgotten. But no one moved, no one dared, because the power in that room felt like a scale tilted entirely against the woman cradling her child. Alicia's mind raced, flashing through memories of her courtroom, moments where her gavel silenced liars, where truth pulled confessions from the stubborn lips of men who thought themselves untouchable. She had stared down corruption before, but never while clutching her daughter's frail body in her arms, never with the stakes so close to her own heart. "Call an ambulance," Alicia said, not as a request, but as an order. The receptionist hesitated, eyes flicking nervously between the doctor and the officers. "Dr. Holloway?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Don't you dare," Holloway snapped. His face flushed red, his composure slipping into something uglier. "This isn't her courtroom. I run this building. If she wants to play powerful, let's see how much that power matters when the police escort her out in handcuffs." The older officer stepped forward again, voice low, commanding. "Ma'am, you need to leave now. Take the child and go." Alicia's jaw tightened. For a split second, she considered the weight of silence, the humiliation of leaving, the danger of her daughter's failing breath, but something deeper, something rooted in generations of women who had carried their families through storms worse than this, rose in her chest. She reached into her handbag with one hand, slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with the officer. He tensed, his hand twitching toward his holster again. The room held its collective breath. And then Alicia withdrew not a weapon, but a small leather wallet embossed with gold. She flipped it open with precision, and the badge gleamed beneath the buzzing light. "Judge Alicia Carter, United States District Court." Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the room. "And if you lay one hand on me or my daughter, I promise you, officer, you will answer for it in ways you cannot begin to imagine." The younger officer froze. The older one's mouth opened, then closed again. The doctor's smirk shattered into disbelief. Whispers spread like wildfire through the waiting room. She's a judge? A federal judge? Jordan whimpered softly, a sound so fragile it cracked the tension like glass underfoot. Alicia pressed her lips against her daughter's damp forehead, her resolve hardening into steel. She turned back to the doctor, her eyes burning with the same fire she carried into every courtroom. "You call yourself a healer," she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "But tonight, you've shown yourself as nothing more than a coward hiding behind prejudice. I will not forget this, and I assure you, neither will the law." The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. It was no longer weighted with fear. It was brimming with anticipation, the kind that comes just before a dam breaks. Because everyone in that waiting room knew something had shifted, and nothing about this night would remain buried. And yet, Alicia knew deep down, this was just the beginning. The silence shattered when the receptionist's shaky hand hovered over the phone, her lips parting as though she might defy Dr. Holloway's order. But his glare pinned her in place like a nail to wood. Alicia's badge still glimmered in the harsh fluorescent light, but she could feel the weight of every second pressing against Jordan's fragile chest. Her daughter's breaths came ragged, shallow, each one shorter than the last, like waves retreating before the ocean collapses in. Time was no longer measured in minutes, but in gasps. The older officer, his voice clipped and tight, leaned closer. "Judge or not, you're disrupting a medical facility. We're giving you one last chance to leave on your own." A ripple of disbelief spread through the waiting room. People shifted, murmured, and someone finally whispered, "This is wrong." A middle-aged man in work boots stood from his chair, his hands balling into fists. "You can't just throw her out. The kid needs help." His voice cracked, but it was enough to draw others in. Heads nodded. A grandmother murmured prayers louder, like a chorus swelling in the background. But Dr. Holloway's smirk widened, though his eyes betrayed a tremor of unease. He had power here, or at least he thought he did. This is exactly what happens when people think their status puts them above rules. Judge Carter, if you really are who you claim, you should know better than to cause a scene. Alicia wanted to scream, but the years of courtroom battles had taught her that fury often burned itself out while precision cut deeper. "A scene?" she repeated softly, her tone like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Doctor, this isn't a scene. This is evidence." Her words hung heavy in the air. Evidence. Everyone understood the weight of that word in her mouth. Jordan whimpered again, this time louder, clutching at her mother's blouse with weak fingers. Panic surged through Alicia's veins, sharper than any courtroom battle she had fought. Her instincts screamed at her to fight harder, louder, but the mother in her warred with the judge. The younger officer broke first. "Ma'am," he said, voice trembling, "maybe I should call EMS myself, just to be safe." But before he could reach for his radio, the older officer's hand shot out, gripping his arm with authority. "Don't!" The command sliced the air. "We don't take orders from people trying to manipulate the system. Don't let her play you." The words stung, not just for Alicia, but for every set of eyes in that waiting room watching a child denied care because of prejudice disguised as policy. A woman with a toddler of her own muttered, "If that were my baby, I'd lose my mind." And then the worst moment came. Jordan's small body jerked, her lips turning a frightening shade of pale blue. "Jordan!" Alicia cried, dropping to her knees. The world spun around her, the gasps of strangers, the thunder of her own heartbeat, the fluorescent light buzzing like an angry insect above. She tilted her daughter's chin, trying to coax air back into her fragile lungs, fighting to stay steady while her own soul shattered. A nurse, standing behind the glass partition, pressed her palm against the window, her face pale with conflict. She looked toward Holloway as though begging permission to intervene, but his cold stare held her frozen. That was the breaking point. Alicia lifted her head, her eyes blazing with a fury that had silenced courtrooms filled with criminals twice her size. "If my daughter dies in this room," she said, her voice carrying like thunder, "every soul in here will bear witness to the truth, and I will see to it that none of you forget the consequences." The receptionist finally moved. Her hand slammed the phone off the hook, fingers trembling as she dialed 911. "We need an ambulance. Child in respiratory distress at Holloway Urgent Care," she blurted, voice sharp with panic. Dr. Holloway's face twisted in rage. "You're finished here," he spat at her. "I'll see to it personally." Doctor?" another nurse interrupted, stepping into the waiting room with trembling resolve. "She's a child. We can't just—" "Shut your mouth," Holloway barked, but the tide was turning. The crowd in the waiting room was no longer silent observers. They were allies, voices rising in outrage. "She's right," someone shouted. "You can't deny a sick child," another added. "Enough is enough!" The weight of public fury began to press against the doctor and the officers, their authority cracking like old glass. And yet Alicia knew. Help was coming too slowly. Jordan's tiny body quivered in her arms, breaths fluttering weakly. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. "Hold on, baby," she whispered, tears falling unchecked. "Mommy's here. Just hold on." The ambulance sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but it was still too far. Every second stretched until it felt like eternity. And as the chaos swirled, Alicia realized this was no longer about her badge or her title. It was about survival, justice, and a reckoning that could no longer be ignored. The rising tide had broken open, and the storm had only just begun. The sound of sirens should have been salvation, but in that sterile waiting room, it became another weapon. The older officer, jaw clenched, stepped forward and growled, "The ambulance is coming." "Good. Now you step aside before I cuff you. You've caused enough trouble." Alicia's arms tightened around Jordan, who whimpered faintly, her eyelids fluttering like fragile wings. The mother in her wanted to scream. The judge in her calculated. She couldn't show fear, not now. Fear was blood in the water to men like these. "Arrest me," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Go ahead. Put handcuffs on a mother while her daughter suffocates. Do it. Let everyone here record it." A dozen phones lifted into the air instantly, the glow of screens turning the waiting room into a silent courtroom. The officer froze mid-step, his bravado cracking as he noticed the cameras. His partner looked between the two, sweat glistening at his temple. Dr. Holloway, however, refused to back down. His voice cut sharp as glass. "This entire circus is your doing, Judge Carter. You think you can twist people's emotions and bully your way into treatment, but medicine follows rules, and you don't get exceptions just because of who you are."
"You're wrong," Alicia said softly, her eyes burning into his. "Medicine follows its oath, and you've broken it."
The nurse who had pressed her hand against the glass earlier suddenly stepped into the room, trembling but resolute. Her name tag caught the fluorescent light. Nurse Ramos. "Doctor," she said, her voice shaking, "I can't stand here while a child dies." I took the same oath. If you won't help her, I will. The doctor's face flushed crimson. "You'll lose your license." "Maybe," Ramos whispered, kneeling beside Alicia, "but I won't lose my soul." Gasps rippled through the room. Alicia blinked back tears of gratitude as Ramos placed a stethoscope to Jordan's chest, her hands brisk and steady despite her trembling. "She needs oxygen, now," Ramos said firmly, standing. "And epinephrine if her airway closes. Doctor, she's critical." But Holloway didn't move. He folded his arms, glaring at her. If you touch that crash cart, you're out. Permanently. The waiting room erupted in chaos. "Give the kid oxygen," someone shouted. "What's wrong with you?" another voice bellowed. The grandmother praying before now rose to her feet, voice thundering. "God is watching this evil." The younger officer finally snapped. His hand went to his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4-2, requesting EMS priority. Child in distress." But the older officer smacked the radio down with his palm, snarling, "You'll regret that insubordination." Alicia's blood boiled. She could feel the weight of every injustice, every headline she had presided over in court now crashing on her shoulders. But this wasn't theory. This wasn't law. This was her child. She shifted Jordan gently in her arms, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Stay with me, baby." Then louder to Ramos, she said, "Do it. Get the oxygen." Ramos hesitated only for a second before sprinting to the crash cart. The room seemed to explode. Holloway lunging after her, officers barking commands, phones recording every desperate second. The crowd surged. Strangers stood between the nurse and the doctor, blocking his path. "She's helping the girl," the man in work boots growled. "You try to stop her, you'll have to go through us." For a moment, everything froze in suspended chaos. A child gasping for air, a mother's fierce love, a doctor's pride, and the trembling choice of ordinary people finally daring to intervene. And then, Ramos wheeled the oxygen tank toward Alicia. Holloway's face twisted in fury. He reached for the tank, shouting, "I forbid this!" But his hand never touched it. The younger officer stepped in, blocking him. His voice trembled, but it carried. "Enough. She's a child. We're not monsters." Alicia looked up at him, surprise flickering in her exhausted eyes. For the first time, someone in uniform had chosen humanity over blind obedience. Ramos fitted the mask over Jordan's face. The hiss of oxygen filled the room. Alicia held her breath, praying, waiting, until her daughter's tiny chest lifted in a steadier rhythm, her lips slowly regaining their color. Tears spilled down Alicia's cheeks as relief crashed into her like a wave. Jordan coughed weakly, then clutched her mother's blouse. Alive. For now. The waiting room erupted, not in panic, but in applause, shouts, sobs of strangers who had become witnesses to both cruelty and courage. But Alicia knew this battle wasn't over. This was only the first crack in a dam that had to break. Because justice wasn't just about saving Jordan. It was about making sure no other mother endured this nightmare again. The hiss of oxygen should have been enough to settle the storm, but it only sharpened the fault lines running through that waiting room. Jordan's color returned, faint but unmistakable, and Alicia clutched her daughter as if she'd been pulled from the edge of a cliff. Relief made her body tremble, but her mind was razor sharp. Dr. Holloway wasn't celebrating. He was pacing, fists clenched, muttering to himself as if trying to rewrite reality. Irresponsible. Illegal. She manipulated everyone here. This entire room will regret interfering with medical procedure. Phones were still up, recording, capturing every word. The crowd had shifted from fear to defiance. They weren't leaving. Not after what they'd witnessed. The older officer tried to regain control, his voice bellowing across the room. "Turn those phones off, right now, or you'll be detained for obstruction." But nobody moved. Instead, the grandmother who had been praying stepped forward, her rosary clenched in her fist like a weapon. "You touch my phone," she said, her voice low and steady, "and the world will know what you did tonight. You can't bury the truth." That silenced him. For the first time, his authority looked fragile. The younger officer, the one who had broken ranks to call EMS, was staring at Alicia, searching her face, her daughter's labored breaths. His jaw tightened, as if he was fighting a war inside himself. Finally, he whispered almost too softly to hear, "Judge Carter." Alicia's eyes snapped to his. "I recognized you," he said, shame flickering in his eyes. "But I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I was wrong." He swallowed. "You're the one who presided over that civil rights case last year, aren't you? The one about the officer who—" "Yes," Alicia cut in, her tone firm. She didn't need his pity or his admiration. What mattered was the shift, the realization that her identity wasn't just a mother's shield, but a sword if she chose to wield it. Holloway spun on his heel, eyes narrowing. "So this is what it is. A setup, a performance. You're leveraging your position for sympathy." His lip curled. "Pathetic." Alicia rose slowly to her feet, Jordan cradled against her chest, her eyes never leaving his. "This isn't about sympathy, Doctor. This is about humanity, something you swore to uphold." Before Holloway could retort, the doors to the ER slammed open. Finally, paramedics stormed in, 2 men and a woman in Navy uniforms pushing a gurney. The room seemed to exhale in unison. "Where's the child?" one paramedic demanded. Alicia stepped forward, her voice clear. "Here. She's stabilized for now, but she needs immediate intervention." Ramos, the nurse who had risked her career, pointed quickly to the oxygen tank. "She's been hypoxic. Needs epinephrine. Stat." The paramedics moved with precision, transferring Jordan onto the gurney, sliding IV lines, administering medication. One of them shot Ramos a look of respect. "Good call. You may have saved her life." The crowd erupted in murmurs, some cheering, others wiping away tears. For a moment it felt like victory. But then Holloway stepped forward, his voice cold as ice. "I'll be filing a full report. This woman interfered with medical authority, and you," he jabbed a finger at Ramos, "will never work in this state again." That broke the fragile calm. People shouted in outrage, phones angled closer. One man shouted, "We've got it all on video, Doc!" "You're finished." Alicia's heart pounded, but she didn't move. She didn't shout. She just watched him, memorizing every sneer, every word, every ounce of arrogance. Because this wasn't over in this waiting room. This was moving to her arena, the courtroom. And unlike Holloway, she understood what it meant to be truly cornered. As the gurney wheeled her daughter away toward the trauma bay, Alicia whispered a silent promise into Jordan's hair. "You'll live, my baby. And when you wake up, you'll see justice done." The cameras kept rolling. The witnesses stayed glued. And Alicia Carter, judge, mother, fighter, was no longer just surviving the night. She was preparing for war. The waiting room was a battlefield of silence after the paramedics rolled Jordan away. The crowd of witnesses hovered, their phones still raised, their anger simmering. And in the center of it all stood Alicia Carter, taller now, unshaken, her eyes fixed on the man who had dared deny her child the most basic right to care. Dr. Holloway wasn't retreating. His arrogance was a mask, but cracks were showing. Sweat clung to his hairline, his fists opened and closed like a boxer waiting for the bell. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think pulling rank, dropping your title makes you untouchable? Judges don't control hospitals. Judges don't control me." Alicia took a step forward, each movement deliberate, as though she were back on the bench addressing a courtroom. "You're right. Judges don't control hospitals, but we control the truth. And the truth, Doctor, is standing right here. Documented, recorded, undeniable." She swept her gaze over the crowd. "Every single person in this room is a witness. To your cruelty, to your prejudice, to your violation of your oath." The older officer tried to reassert control, barking, "That's enough." Doctor, you don't have to listen to this circus. But his words rang hollow. The crowd booed. A teenager in the back shouted, "We saw you, man!" We got it all. Then came the crack in the facade. The younger officer, the one who had recognized Alicia, stepped forward and squared himself against his partner. His voice was steady. "No, they're right. We can't bury this. Judge Carter's identity doesn't change what happened here, it proves it. You called us on a mother for trying to save her child, and we let it happen." The room froze. Even Holloway blinked, stunned by the betrayal of his supposed ally. Alicia didn't break eye contact with the doctor. She lowered her voice, every syllable sharp as a blade. "You kicked me while I held my sick child. You called the police to drag me away while she couldn't breathe. And you denied her oxygen, basic care, because of the color of my skin. That's not medicine. That's assault. That's negligence. And I promise you, doctor, the world will know." For the first time, Holloway faltered. His mouth opened, searching for a defense, but nothing came. The witnesses pressed closer, cameras recording from every angle, their voices rising in chants, "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Alicia reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather case. She opened it slowly, revealing her judicial ID, the state seal glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. She held it up for everyone to see. "I am Judge Alicia Carter," she declared, her voice ringing through the room like a gavel striking wood. "And I swear before every soul here, this man will answer for what he has done tonight." The roar that followed shook the walls. The older officer stepped back, hands raised, defeated. The younger officer bowed his head, almost in relief, and Dr. Holloway, his arrogance stripped away, looked suddenly small, cornered not by the law he thought he commanded, but by the truth he could no longer escape. Alicia's phone vibrated in her hand. A message lit the screen from her clerk at the courthouse, one sentence that sealed everything. "I've seen the live stream." The Chief Justice is watching. Her eyes flicked back to the doctor, her lips curling into a calm, devastating smile. The gavel had already fallen. The courtroom was packed 3 weeks later, a storm of tension wrapped in silence. Reporters lined the benches, their cameras poised like weapons. Protesters filled the hall outside, chanting for justice. For once, the eyes of the nation weren't on a celebrity or politician. They were on a doctor who had turned away a child in need, and on the black mother who refused to be silent. Judge Alicia Carter did not sit on the bench that day. Instead, she sat in the gallery, holding Jordan's hand, her daughters breathing steady now after treatment and rest. Alicia's colleagues had made sure another judge presided, to remove any doubt of bias. She was not there to rule. She was there to witness, to remember, to show her child what justice was supposed to look like. Dr. Holloway stood at the defense table, his posture sagging. Gone was the pressed white coat, the aura of untouchable authority. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The live stream had gone viral within hours, spreading across every platform. Millions of views, millions of voices calling him a disgrace. Hospitals across the state suspended him. Medical boards filed charges. He was no longer the man who wielded power over others' lives. He was a man stripped bare before the truth. The prosecutor's voice cut through the silence like thunder. "This case is not about medicine. It is about morality. It is about whether we, as a society, will tolerate a doctor refusing emergency care because of race. It is about whether prejudice has a place in our hospitals, where every second can mean life or death." Every word landed like a hammer, each syllable echoing Alicia's own fight that night. She could feel Jordan's small hand squeeze hers tighter, her daughter's voice whispering, "Mama, we're winning." Holloway's attorney tried to spin excuses, stress, miscommunication, misunderstanding, but the evidence was irrefutable. The videos showed his words, his sneer, his denial of oxygen. Witnesses testified. Even the young officer who had stood in that room came forward, voice shaking but clear. I was there. I let it happen, and I regret it every day. The verdict didn't take long. Guilty on charges of negligence, misconduct, and discrimination. His medical license revoked. Sentenced to community service under strict supervision and ordered to pay damages to cover Jordan's treatment. But no sentence could truly equal the shame of what the world had seen. As the gavel fell, the courtroom erupted in applause, not just for punishment, but for accountability, for proof that even those who hide behind power could be unmasked. Alicia stood slowly, gathering Jordan in her arms. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile in triumph. She simply whispered into her daughter's ear, "You're safe. And they will never do this to you again." Outside, the crowd waited. When Alicia emerged, they erupted. Not with anger this time, but with gratitude. Reporters pushed forward, microphones trembling in the air, asking for her reaction. She looked at them all, her eyes tired yet burning with fire. "I didn't fight as a judge tonight," she said softly. "I fought as a mother." And no mother should ever have to beg for her child's life because of the color of her skin. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder to every hospital, every officer, every institution, that justice doesn't live in titles. It lives in humanity, and we all have a duty to protect it. Her words carried beyond the courthouse steps into living rooms, into classrooms, into conversations across the nation. That night, as Alicia tucked Jordan into bed, she sat for a long while in the quiet, watching her daughter breathe. Every inhale and exhale was a victory. Every steady beat of her heart was proof that love and persistence could outlast hatred. And as she finally closed her eyes, she whispered to herself what she wished every person watching could hear. They thought they could silence me, but all they did was make the world listen louder. The screen fades to black. A single question appears in bold white letters.